At 6 a.m., David bent down to pick up a white envelope on his doorstep, and his world collapsed.
One envelope.
A notice of default. Foreclosure looming. More than $200 in debt. In
Are we
seconds,
broke?
The American dream he built unraveled, bills flying like falling
30
leaves.
years of overtime.
His wife
spent
crying
like
at the
confetti.
kitchen table. Children shouting, "Are we broke?" 30
This
years of
is a final
overtime.
warning.
Bonuses wasted. Credit cards
Bonuses
maxed out.
vanished.
All dissolving into panic and
Credit
shame.
cards swelled.
But inside the wreckage lies a formula
Pride
so
stayed.
cold and so simple.
The American
It
dream
could turn 5
turned
brutal
into a
years into
collection
25 years of freedom. This is the mortgage mirage. A middle-class dream that turned nightmare.
Inside the
The
wreckage,
morning sun had
one
barely
cold,
broken over the
simple
rooftops
method.
of suburban Chicago when David Harper opened his front door to grab the newspaper.
5 years of
For
discipline,
years, this
not
ritual
luck,
had been ordinary,
to make
an
money.
unconscious part of his life, as steady as the crack in the driveway or the whistle of the commuter train
Watch
that
the
cut
full
across
money
the
story.
neighborhood at 7 each morning.
Subscribe for
But
real
on this day,
strategies that
something
work.
was different. Sitting on the welcome mat, half shadowed by the doorframe, was a thick white envelope. It wasn't the glossy advertisement for home improvement services he usually kicked aside, nor the flimsy flyer for a new pizza place. It was official, stamped with bold black letters across the top, notice of default. David froze. For a long second, the sounds of the morning seemed to vanish. No birds, no train, no muffled voices from neighbors walking their dogs. Just silence and the envelope, heavy with unspoken judgment. His hand shook as he picked it up. And though he hadn't yet opened it, he knew. He had been dodging this reality for months, ignoring calls, stacking unopened bills in the kitchen drawer, convincing himself that somehow, some way, he'd get ahead. But now the truth lay in his palm. Unavoidable, cold. He stepped back inside, his shoes still on, and dropped into the armchair by the window. His wife Rachel was in the kitchen, humming softly as she scrambled eggs for their daughter Lily. The smell of butter and toast filled the house, comforting in a way that mocked the dread now rising in his throat. Their son Noah clattered down the stairs, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, already asking if they could go out for pizza that night. It all felt too normal, too fragile, like a scene in a movie just seconds before the disaster hits. David tore the envelope open. The paper inside was thicker than most, embossed with the logo of the mortgage servicer. The text aligned with sterile precision. He scanned the words. "You are hereby notified that you are in default under the deed of trust, unless the arrears of $18.400 are paid in full within 30 days. Foreclosure proceedings will commence." His breath caught. $18,000, 30 days. Otherwise, the house gone. The house that had been his trophy. The symbol of making it into the American middle class. The house where he had planted rose bushes in the spring, where Rachel had painted the kitchen walls yellow to make them feel like sunshine in winter, where Noah and Lily had taken their first steps. The dream was now branded with the threat of foreclosure. The paper slipped from his hands onto the floor. Rachel, sensing something off, peeked in from the kitchen doorway. "What is it, David?" Her voice carried the kind of tension that comes from months of half-truths. The kind of fear she already suspected but didn't want confirmed. He didn't answer immediately, and that silence spoke louder than anything. She walked over, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and picked up the letter. The moment her eyes traced the words, her face drained of color. The towel fell to the carpet. Noah, curious, wandered in. "What's going on?" he asked, his teenage voice somewhere between innocence and accusation. David tried to say nothing, tried to shield him a little longer, but Rachel's sob cut through the room. She pressed the letter against her chest as though holding it there could somehow soften its edges. Noah's eyes darted between them, piecing it together faster than David would have liked. Are we losing the house?" His voice cracked, and Lily, still chewing her toast in the kitchen, looked up with wide eyes. At 12, she was old enough to sense disaster, young enough to feel betrayed by it. The living room seemed to shrink around them. David's chest tightened as shame rushed over him. He thought about every decision that had led here, the overtime shifts he believed would always be there, the new SUV parked in the driveway bought on credit, the vacation to Disney they couldn't afford but convinced themselves the kids deserved. He had believed the same myth millions of middle-class families clung to: work harder, and it will all sort itself out. But the math didn't care about effort. The numbers had been waiting, growing in silence, and now they had arrived like executioners. Rachel dropped onto the couch, her face in her hands. "You promised me," she whispered through tears. "You promised this house was secure." Her voice was small but sharp, each word slicing David open. He wanted to argue, to say he had done everything he could. But the evidence lay on the floor between them. The dream they had built was a mirage, and the desert sun had finally burned it away. David bent down, picked up the letter again, and forced himself to read the words slowly, deliberately, as if repetition might change them. But the sentences remained merciless. Pay or lose. 30 days. No sympathy. No negotiation. Just numbers and deadlines. He felt the weight of his children's eyes on him. Their silent question, "What now?" He had no answer. The sound of the toaster popping startled them all. Absurdly ordinary against the backdrop of collapse. Rachel stood abruptly and walked back to the kitchen. Her shoulders stiff, her body trembling. David sat frozen, the letter limp in his hands. His mind racing with shame and panic. The home around him, the framed photos on the walls, the rug beneath his feet. The laughter that had once filled these rooms, suddenly felt borrowed. Temporary, fragile, the walls that had been their pride now whispered of failure. That morning, the Harper family's middle-class dream cracked wide open. And for David, holding that notice of default, it wasn't just the threat of losing a house. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about money, about security, about what it meant to provide for a family, was a lie he had been living for far too long. The kitchen smelled of butter and coffee, yet the air was heavy as if someone had draped a wet blanket over the room. Rachel set the plates down with hands that trembled just enough to make the forks rattle against the porcelain. She forced a smile, a mask cracking at the edges, and said the words she always said, "Eat before it gets cold," but her voice betrayed her. Flat where it used to sing. David sat at the head of the table, staring at his untouched eggs, the notice of default burning in his mind like a neon sign. He kept his eyes on the plate, as if avoiding Rachel's face and the children's questions might somehow reset the morning. His son Noah shoveled cereal into his mouth but didn't chew, his gaze darting back and forth between his parents. Lily stirred her orange juice with a spoon, the sound ringing too loud in the silence. For a moment, they all played the game of pretending that the letter wasn't real, that the roof above their heads wasn't slipping away, that this was just another weekday breakfast. But children, no matter their age, can smell secrets. They see the things parents try to bury. It was Lily who broke the silence first. She looked straight at her father, her voice small but steady. "Dad, are we out of money?" The words landed like a slap. David's fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against the plate. Rachel froze mid-bite, her eyes flicking to her daughter in horror, then to David as if begging him to conjure an answer that wouldn't destroy the illusion. But there was no easy script to follow, no comforting lie strong enough to hold. Noah leaned forward, seizing on his sister's question with teenage bluntness. "Yeah, Dad, are we broke? Is that what's going on?" His voice cracked with anger more than fear, the kind of anger that comes when a child realizes their parents aren't invincible. David felt the walls closing in. He wanted to say no, to reassure them, to tell them that everything was under control. He wanted to promise pizza nights and summer vacations and Christmas mornings filled with gifts. But the words wouldn't come. His throat constricted around the truth. He glanced at Rachel, hoping she might rescue him. But her eyes were wet, her face pale. She was done covering for him. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, David cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. We're having some trouble. Just for now. It's complicated, but we'll figure it out." Lily's spoon stopped moving, her lower lip trembled. "But, are we going to lose the house?" Rachel's composure cracked. She dropped her fork, buried her face in her hands, and sobbed. The sound echoed through the kitchen, raw and unfiltered, the kind of cry that tells children more than words ever could. Noah pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, and muttered, "So it's true." He stormed off, leaving his plate half-eaten. David closed his eyes, shame coursing through him like electricity. He could almost hear the judgments. Not from strangers, but from his own family. "You failed us." That was what their silence said, what their tears screamed. Lily slid out of her chair and wrapped her arms around Rachel, whispering through her own tears, "Don't cry, Mom." It was a reversal David couldn't bear, the child comforting the parent. He wanted to leap up, to fix it all, but his body felt paralyzed by the enormity of the debt. The impossible math, the ticking clock of 30 days. He finally rose, pacing to the sink, staring out the window at the street where neighbors' houses stood tall, pristine, and secure. Just yesterday he'd waved to Mr. Thompson watering his lawn, pretending everything was fine. Just last week he had smiled at the Johnsons as they loaded their kids into the minivan for soccer practice. Did they know? Could they sense the rot behind his painted door? Rachel's voice broke his spiral. David, they deserve to know the truth. Her words cut deep. She was right. The secrecy was poison, and the children already knew more than he admitted. He turned back toward them, his voice unsteady. We're not out of money completely. But yes, we're in trouble. Big trouble, and unless we fix it, the bank will take the house. Lily gasped, clinging tighter to her mother. Noah's footsteps could be heard upstairs, pacing angrily. Rachel just shook her head, staring at David with a mix of rage and despair. How did you let it get this far? She whispered, though her voice carried the weight of accusation. David didn't answer. Because the truth was ugly, he had believed the lie that overtime could outpace inflation. That credit cards could bridge the gaps. That refinancing the mortgage would buy time. He had believed in the illusion of security. And now his family was choking on its collapse. The eggs grew cold. The coffee sat untouched. Outside, the neighborhood came alive with the sounds of car engines and dogs barking. The ordinary hum of a middle-class dream still intact for everyone else. But inside the Harper house, the dream had fractured. The children had asked the question that stripped away all pretense. Do we have money? And the answer, brutal and undeniable, was no. David slumped back into his chair, his face in his hands. Rachel wept quietly beside him. Lily's eyes glistened with the kind of innocence that should never have to confront foreclosure. The kitchen, once the heart of their home, now felt like a courtroom. And the verdict had been delivered, guilty of believing in a mirage. That morning, breakfast ended not with full stomachs but with broken silence. And in that silence, the Harper's middle-class dream bled out across the table, fragile and irretrievable. Before the letter on the doormat and the breakfast that broke in half, there had been a summer afternoon filled with helium balloons and the smell of cut grass. A Saturday that glowed in memory like a postcard pressed under glass. The realtor had jingled a set of keys at the threshold and said, "Welcome home, Harper's," in a voice pitched to sell fate. David had taken the keys as if they were medals. Rachel had laughed, head thrown back, the laugh of a woman who had finally outrun apartments with thin walls and neighbors who played music at midnight. Noah, 8 then, had sprinted across the empty living room, his socked feet skidding. Lily, 4, turned slow circles under the ceiling fan, gazing up like the blades were angel wings. The house was still a shell, echoing, dusty, but they called it beautiful because that is what you call the thing you stake your life on. They moved in with a caravan of borrowed pickup trucks and boxy rental vans. Friends handing up lamps and coffee tables like offerings. The first night, they ate takeout on the floor, knees touching, cartons balanced on paint cans. The television set a week away and not missed. Rachel pointed at the blank kitchen walls and said, "Lemon, something bright," and David said, "Of course," as if paint could lock in joy. Later, when the kids slept on mattresses without frames, they stood together at the back door beneath the faint hum of distant traffic and watched the wind move across their new patch of lawn. "We did it," David whispered into Rachel's hair. He meant what everyone means by that sentence. We broke the tape. Crossed into the club, wrote our names in the ledger of people who belong. The mortgage had been a ceremony, too. The broker wore a navy suit and spoke in percentages that sounded like blessings. He slid forms across a polished table, pages crisp and perfumed with legitimacy. "With your income trajectory and expected bonus, this is easily serviceable," he said, tapping a column of projections that rose like a staircase on the screen. "You're a great candidate for the 5-1 ARM, lower initial rate. Gives you time to grow." David nodded, dazzled by the numbers that leaned in his favor, relieved by any phrase that started with lower. The broker smiled and added the line all brokers learn to deliver like a sacrament: you'd be throwing money away on rent. No one in the room said that mortgages can be throwers, too, if you feed them wrong. That wasn't the liturgy. On move-in weekend, the neighborhood smelled like charcoal and new beginnings. Someone set a folding table on the driveway and declared it a housewarming. Kids chalked galaxies onto the sidewalk, adults held red plastic cups like shields against awkwardness. The Thompsons brought a casserole under foil. The Johnsons offered a bottle of Prosecco. David poured and poured, his shoulders loosening with each refill. Each, congrats, man, like a stamp on his passport to the middle class. He took Rachel's hand as the sun faded and whispered, "This is our American dream." She squeezed back. There is a particular softness in the face of a person who believes the hard part is over. Money felt like a tractable animal then, temperamental. Sure, but trainable with the right treats. David calculated their budget with a spreadsheet that made him feel competent. Mortgage here. Utilities there. Groceries. Gas. One sliver for savings. A sliver he always assumed would grow because that is what slivers do in optimistic models. A promotion arrived. A raise followed. Overtime gushed for a season and made him cocky. They replaced the old sedan with an SUV whose leather smelled like the future and safety. They replaced the wobbly dining chairs with sturdy ones that didn't wobble. They replaced, someday, with, this summer. Bought plane tickets on credit and hotel rooms with points. The kind of tricks blogs praise in font as confident as their advice. In those days, the house taught him to spend. A room begged for a rug. A bare wall begged for art. The backyard begged for a fire pit and string lights and friends who would be impressed. When the boiler coughed in February, they financed the repair and told each other, "It's fine, cheaper than replacing." When the deck steps sagged in June, they bought lumber and told each other, "We're investing in our home." And were not wrong, they were investing in something. On Saturday mornings, David watched YouTube videos about DIY upgrades, poured coffee into a travel mug, and marched to the hardware store like a soldier of suburbia. He learned thresholds and grout and the thousand small vocabularies of ownership that make a person proud and tired at once. They hosted a New Year's Eve party the winter after they moved in. A glittering soiree of Costco shrimps and homemade dips and the kind of playlist that makes even reluctant uncles nod along. At midnight, with confetti in their hair and champagne in plastic flutes, David made a resolution that sounded like destiny. This is the year we max the Roth. Finish the basement, and take the kids to the Grand Canyon. Everyone cheered, because the sentence wore confidence like a tuxedo. No one asked how a single paycheck could honor three promises with such different appetites. No one asks questions at the cusp of a year. If there were warnings, they appeared polite. The credit card rewards portal applauded their activity. The bank app sent congratulatory emojis when they qualified for a higher limit. The SUV salesman called after 12 months with a tone of friendship and said, "We can roll you into the new model with no money down." Every path forward was paved, every lane widened as they entered it. The world did not just give permission to spend, it curated it. He told himself 1,000 times that the money story he was writing was rational. "We'll make money later," he'd say after a dinner bill that looked like a car payment. "Once I finish the certification. Once Rachel gets that stipend. Once the kids age out of braces and day camp." Later is the most expensive word in finance. Later nods from the doorway and invites you to sit. And while you're sitting, it quietly compounds costs. The investing strategies he planned to dig into lived in browser tabs he never read. ETFs with tickers that felt like passwords to a club he swore he'd join soon. Meanwhile, their real investments were glossy, steel appliances. A sectional couch. A grill with a hood that closed like a vault. Pride is not deductible. It is, however, amortized, over evenings when you need to feel like you're winning and buy something to prove it. There were moments, small, ignorable, when the mask slipped. A bonus, restructured, into a promise that arrived thin. A tax bill heavier than expected because the withholdings had been optimized. A medical copay that nudged the grocery budget into the red. Each one was a pebble rattling in the wheel well. A sound you decide is nothing because stopping the car to check would announce that you're not in control. David found ways to explain the pebbles: timing, seasonality, the economy, a birthday month that deserved an exception. "We're fine," he'd tell Rachel, and she'd nod because they both preferred the comfort of the sentence to the discomfort of arithmetic. And then there were the celebrations. The housewarming photos lived on the mantle, glossy witnesses to a season when possibility looked permanent. The kids' first day of school pictures lined the staircase. Their smiles inching upward each year like stock charts on magnets. The backyard fire pit became a place where stories swelled into legends and nobody asked what it cost to keep the flame fed. On a late summer night under strings of soft bulbs, a neighbor lifted his beer and said, "You guys are doing it right." And David swallowed the compliment like medicine. He let it medicate the low throb of unease he felt when the minimum payments crept and the emergency fund stayed theoretical. He told himself they were building equity, some of it emotional, some of it on Zillow, and equity is the magic word that makes a heavy house feel as light as helium. If David had pressed pause and looked at the ledger then, before the letter on the mat, he might have seen the plot twist assembling itself in small, neat lines, a 5-1 arm ticking toward its reset. Childcare costs shrinking but college savings still a rumor. A pair of credit cards quietly accreting interest at 21.99%. A car lease that would mature into a choice between pride and prudence. A life insistent on upgrades with a paycheck stubbornly finite. He might have heard the future knocking, softly at first, then harder, asking whether he wanted to fund appearances or outcomes. But momentum cosplays as certainty. It says, keep going, you're almost there. And it turns passive income into a fantasy you scroll past at midnight and YouTube into a lullaby singing. You can have it all if you hack it right. Now, in the bright ache of the present, those golden scenes flickered behind his eyes like a reel he could not stop. The realtor's keys, the lemon-yellow kitchen, the red cups on the folding table, the vows they made under string lights to become the kind of people who always had enough. He sat at the same island where they'd planned vacations and paint colors and holiday menus and stared at a letter that did not care about vows. The contrast cut like glass, the then of helium and Prosecco. The now of legal stationery and 30 days. The dream had not betrayed them, they had fed it the wrong fuel. And as the house settled around him with little creaks, the way old wood sighs when the temperature changes, he realized that what they had called stability had been choreography, beautiful, precise, and ruinously expensive. He closed his eyes and tried to picture the lawn the night they moved in. How the wind had combed it and made it look like a place that would never hurt them. He tried to remember the taste of the first dinner on the floor and the exact heat of Rachel's hand in his. He held those in his mind because they were real, even if the scaffolding he built around them was not. The American dream had not promised that a house would save him. It had offered him a home and asked him to learn the math. He hadn't. That failure echoed longer than any party song. The mistakes never announced themselves with fanfare. They came disguised as upgrades, justified as rewards, tiny enough that no one in the Harper household thought to call them dangerous. It began with the SUV. Their old sedan had wheezed through winters, the heater coughing before it warmed. So when the dealer dangled a zero down, low monthly lease, David signed without looking too closely at the fine print. The leather smelled like victory. The touchscreen glowed like progress. And Rachel smiled because she didn't have to wonder if the car would stall on the school run. But every month, the payment arrived like a tax on their illusion of success. The credit cards became accomplices. At first, they were bridges, helping smooth out Christmas gifts, birthday dinners, a last-minute flight for a wedding. Then they became scaffolding, holding up a lifestyle that had started to outpace their salaries. Minimum payments whispered the same lie each month. You're fine. You're afloat. You're in control. Interest rates howled behind the whisper. But the Harpers tuned him out. We'll pay it off when the bonus hits, David would say, swiping the card again. Vacations told themselves as stories of cleverness. They didn't buy tickets, they redeemed points. They didn't pay full price, they hacked the system. A hotel in Miami here. A ski cabin in Colorado there. Each trip justified by loyalty programs and blog posts about maximizing rewards. But rewards don't erase the bills for food, excursions, taxis, or the essentials Rachel picked up at the airport boutique. They came home sun-kissed and smiling, only to find their bank account pale and thin. The bonuses were the cruelest illusion. Every December, the company hinted at a number, sometimes even printed it in a target range. David and Rachel planned entire budgets on those phantom digits, the bathroom renovation, the tuition deposit, the new washer. When the bonus came in light, or didn't come at all, they patched the gap with credit. Next year will be better, David told himself, pushing the spreadsheet numbers around like puzzle pieces. But better never arrived, only more urgent. It was all so ordinary, so familiar to families like theirs. New car, new points vacation, just this once splurge. No one would call them reckless. They were living exactly as middle-class culture taught them: spend, upgrade, reward, repeat. Yet behind each small decision was a drip of red ink. A quiet leak that filled the basement of their finances. They never noticed the waterline until it reached their knees. And that was the trap, the little things. They believed the enemy was catastrophe. The big events that wreck a life, a layoff, a crash, a medical bill, but the enemy had been polite all along, knocking gently each month with statements that said, amount due, in polite fonts. They mistook politeness for safety. They mistook normal for sustainable. By the time the letter of default arrived, they weren't being punished for one great mistake. They were drowning in thousands of little ones, each stamped with reasons that sounded sensible when spoken aloud. The SUV smelled good. The card earned points. The vacation was practically free. The bonus was all but guaranteed. The American dream had been chipped away not by storms but by teaspoons, until the foundation sagged under the weight of ordinary. The letter had sat on the counter for 2 days, its edges curling slightly from the steam of the coffee pot. David stared at it every time he walked through the kitchen, as if his eyes might soften the words printed there. Notice of default. 3 words that felt heavier than any mortgage he had ever signed. On the 3rd morning, after Rachel left for work and the kids trudged off to school, David finally picked up the phone. He rehearsed phrases in his head like a man scripting a confession. Temporary setback. Need a little more time. We've always been good customers. He clung to the belief that if he just explained, someone on the other end would understand. The hold music was deceptively cheerful, a chirpy piano loop that repeated every 30 seconds. David's thumb drummed against the table, his other hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles ached. Finally, a click, a voice, clipped and professional. This is Michelle in Collections. How can I help you today? His throat tightened. Hi, yes, my name is David Harper. I received a notice about my mortgage. It says we're in default. I just wanted to see if there was a way to work something out. Maybe defer a payment or... The voice cut him off before he could gather momentum. Mr. Harper, your loan is 92 days past due. According to the terms of your contract, you are required to pay the total past due balance in a lump sum. That's $14.872.63. Unless that is received, foreclosure proceedings will continue. The words dropped one by one, metallic and cold, like coins into an empty well. David blinked hard, pressing the phone to his ear as if proximity could soften them. 14,000, he repeated, his voice cracking. That's not possible right now. I thought maybe we could adjust the payment plan. We've been loyal customers for over a decade. Silence hummed on the line, followed by the same rehearsed tone. Mr. Harper, I understand this is difficult. However, your loan agreement outlines these terms. Without the lump sum, foreclosure is the next step. David felt heat rise in his face. He gripped the back of the chair, forcing calm into his voice. Please, we just need a little time. I've worked overtime for years. I've never missed payments until now. We're not asking for a free ride. Just a chance to catch up. Michelle's sigh was audible, the kind of weary exhale that came from saying the same sentence to 100 different desperate voices. Mr. Harper, we don't modify loans at this stage of delinquency. Your options are clear. Pay the lump sum, refinance with another institution, or surrender the property voluntarily. Surrender. The word hit him like a slap. His house, his children's bedrooms, his wife's garden, the walls painted with handprints from when Emma was 3, reduced to property. A line item in a spreadsheet. His voice cracked into a whisper. We'll lose the house. Michelle didn't answer that. She simply repeated the script. Payment in full or foreclosure. Would you like me to process the payment today? David's chest tightened, a sharp ache beneath his ribs. He hung up without answering, the click of the phone louder than the entire conversation. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock. He stood there, hands shaking, the enormity of the system pressing down on him. It was the first time he understood, not suspected, not feared, but truly understood, that the bank wasn't a partner, wasn't a safety net, wasn't even listening. It was a machine, and he was simply one more account number on a screen. And in that moment, as the unpaid bills stared at him from the counter, David realized the dream they'd built was no longer theirs. It belonged to the bank. And unless something changed, The lock on their front door would soon belong to someone else. 2. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast. The kind of detail that would normally be forgotten by noon but that morning clung to everything like smoke. Rachel stood by the counter, her arms crossed tight, while David sat hunched at the table, staring into the dark pool of coffee he hadn't touched. Between them lay a stack of bills and the notice from the bank. Its black letters impossible to ignore. 14,000, Rachel said, her voice low at first, trembling not from volume but from restraint. 14,000, David, and you didn't tell me until it was already this bad. David rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing into his skull. I thought I could fix it before it got to this point. Overtime, a bonus at the end of the quarter, maybe a side contract, I thought. She slammed her hand on the counter, the sound sharp and startling. You thought, that's your defense, you thought, while I've been paying utilities with credit cards and juggling groceries with coupons. You thought this would magically go away. His eyes flickered up, wounded. I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want the kids to feel it. I was trying to protect us. Her laugh was bitter, more like a sob forced backward. No, David, you weren't protecting us. You were protecting your pride. You always promised you'd make money, cover the bills, keep us safe, but promises don't pay mortgages. You lied to me with every, it'll be fine. The air in the kitchen was thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. The refrigerator hummed faintly, oblivious to the collapse happening in front of it. David's hands clenched into fists on the table. It wasn't a lie. I believed it when I said it. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just pushed a little more, the numbers would turn around. That's what they always told us, hard work pays off. But it doesn't, Rachel, not if you don't play the game right, not if you don't know the rules. Her eyes glistened, tears pooling but not falling. And whose fault is that? You refused to listen. I begged you years ago to talk to a planner, to stop swiping the card for every new gadget, every vacation we couldn't afford. But no, you wanted the American dream. The house, the car, the image, and now we're drowning in it. The word, dream, cracked in the air, jagged and cruel. David pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping against the tile. It wasn't just for me. I wanted this for you. For the kids. I didn't want him to feel like they had less than anyone else. Rachel's voice broke, tears finally spilling over. And what do they have now? David, a house we're about to lose. A future where we're teaching them that pretending is better than planning. The silence afterward was unbearable. He looked at her, red eyes, trembling hands, and felt something fracture inside. Not just his pride, something deeper. The marriage that had survived late nights, tight budgets, and even illness was cracking under the weight of financial betrayal. Rachel wiped her cheeks roughly, her voice steadier now but sharper, colder. I can forgive mistakes, David, but I don't know if I can forgive deception. You've been hiding this for months. While I cooked dinners, while I read to Emma, while I balanced the checkbook with half-truths you fed me, you were already losing the house under our feet. He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. Rachel, I swear to you, I thought I could handle it. I thought I could make money fast enough to patch the holes. But you're right, it was an illusion, and it's collapsing now. Her shoulders shook, anger and sorrow colliding in her chest. She turned away, staring out the window at the neatly trimmed lawns of their neighborhood, where other families ate breakfasts without foreclosure notices hovering over them. Then face it, David, she whispered, face it and fix it. Because if you can't, this family won't survive the debt, and neither will we. The words lingered in the air, heavier than any bill, and for the first time, David realized that losing the house might not be the worst thing. Losing Rachel could be. The morning light slanted across the driveway, catching the polished chrome of the SUV like it was mocking him. David stood at the window, coffee cooling in his hand, staring at the car that had once felt like a trophy. He remembered the salesman's handshake, the scent of leather seats, Rachel's tentative smile as she slid into the passenger side for the first time. Back then, it had been more than just a vehicle, it was proof that he was providing. That his family had made it. The American dream parked right outside their suburban home. Now, it looked different, not like success, but like debt wrapped in steel and gloss. Every monthly payment was a knife twisting deeper, a reminder that appearances had been bought on credit. not built on stability. The bank still owned more of that SUV than he ever would. And he knew it. His son Michael bounded down the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, and glanced out the window. "We taking the SUV, Dad, or the old sedan?" His tone was casual, innocent, but it cut David to the bone. Even his kids saw the SUV as part of their identity, smooth rides to soccer games, pulling up at school like they belonged in the middle-class picture-perfect life. Rachel walked into the kitchen, her face pale from another sleepless night. Her eyes landed on the SUV, then on David. "You know we can't keep it," she said softly, but her voice had an edge. "We're bleeding every month. That car's a payment, not a prize." David's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend his choice, to say it was more than a car, it was dignity. But deep inside, he knew she was right. Still, the thought of selling it felt like peeling off the last layer of pride he had left. What would the neighbors think when they saw the shiny SUV gone, replaced by the rattling old sedan with its dented bumper? What would his co-workers think when he no longer pulled into the lot in a vehicle that whispered success before he even opened the door? "I can't just give it up, Rachel," he muttered, setting his cup down too hard. "That car it's part of us. People see it, they see we're okay." Rachel's eyes narrowed, tears forming again but not falling. "People, David, who cares what people think? They don't pay our bills. They don't carry our debt. We do. Every month that car sits in the driveway, it's another month we're choosing image over survival." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. David's thoughts spun, the memory of friends complimenting the SUV at barbecues. The pride in his daughter Emma's voice when she bragged to her friends about the new family car. It had felt like validation, like proof that his long hours and endless stress were worth it. But now those memories twisted, hollow, poisoned by reality. He imagined listing the car online, handing over the keys to a stranger, watching it drive away while he stood in the empty driveway. He imagined Rachel's relief, but also the humiliation of telling Michael and Emma that the SUV was gone. The choice sat in front of him like a stone: keep the illusion alive or sacrifice it for the chance at a different ending. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. Her voice was firmer now, carrying a weight that brooked no argument. "If you keep that car, David, it's not just the bank that owns us, it's our pride. And pride won't keep this roof over our heads." David's chest tightened. He wanted to fight, but the truth in her words pressed down on him until his shoulders sagged. He looked back at the SUV gleaming in the sunlight. It no longer looked like a prize. It looked like a trap. In that moment, David knew the decision was no longer about the car. It was about who he wanted to be, a man clinging to appearances or a man willing to bleed for a chance at freedom. The choice was his. But either way, something was about to break. The kitchen table was cluttered with school flyers, registration forms, and brightly colored brochures. Noah's basketball camp form sat on top. Bold letters promising elite training. Summer 2025. Lily's art program flyer lay beside it, her crayon doodles already scrawled along the edges as if she was claiming it as hers. Both children had placed the papers there deliberately, like offerings to the gods of possibility, trusting their parents to make dreams real. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked him up. She didn't look at David. Not yet. She already knew the math. Already felt the guilt pressing down. Noah's camp was $600 for the summer. Lily's art program was $400. Together, it was $1,000, an impossible figure when the mortgage alone felt like a blade against their throats. "Mom," Noah said, his voice hopeful, his eyes bright. "Coach says if I go to this camp, I might actually get noticed. Like, scouted. It's a big deal. And Mrs. Callahan says my art's improving." Lily chimed in, holding up a sketchbook with smudges of charcoal. "She says this class could help me win a scholarship later." Rachel bit her lip until she tasted copper. She forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Sweethearts, I know you both want this. And I know how much it means. But," her voice cracked, she couldn't say the word yet. David stared at the forms, his throat tight. His children's faces were filled with belief, the same kind of belief he used to have when he signed for the mortgage. For the SUV. For every yes that had piled into a mountain of debt. And now, here he was, about to say no to the only two people who mattered most. Rachel finally exhaled, the word falling like glass shattering. We can't afford it this year. The silence that followed was suffocating. Noah's shoulders slumped, his face clouding as if someone had snuffed out a light inside him. Lily hugged her sketchbook to her chest, her lower lip trembling. But Mom, Noah said, trying to keep his voice steady, you always said if we worked hard, you'd help us chase our dreams. David's chest burned. The boy's words pierced deeper than any bank letter ever could. He wanted to slam his fist on the table, to shout that it wasn't fair, that life had stolen their choices. But what good would anger do when the truth was already carved into their budget? Rachel's tears slipped free, silent but relentless. We're not saying no forever, she whispered, reaching across to touch Noah's hand. Just, not now, not until we get through this. Lily's voice was small, almost a whisper. So it's because we don't have money? The word hung in the air, brutal in its simplicity. Not because we're busy, or maybe next year. Just money. David finally spoke, his voice rough. It's not because you're not worth it. You are, both of you. It's because I made mistakes. I thought working hard was enough. But I didn't plan, and now we're paying for that. Noah looked away, jaw clenched, his young pride stung by disappointment. Lily's eyes filled, and she pushed her sketchbook away, as if the dream itself had become too heavy to carry. Rachel reached for David's hand under the table, squeezing hard, not in forgiveness, but in solidarity. The unspoken truth bound them both. This was what debt stole. Not just money, not just houses. It stole futures, chipped away at dreams, forced children to learn the cruel arithmetic of scarcity too soon. As Noah stomped upstairs and Lily slipped quietly to her room, David sat frozen, staring at the empty forms. He felt the weight of fatherhood pressing down like a verdict. He could face the bank. He could even face Rachel's anger. But facing the disappointment in his children's eyes, that was the kind of debt no paycheck could ever repay. And for the first time, he realized the real foreclosure wasn't just on their house. It was on their children's dreams, dreams he had sworn to protect. The office break room buzzed with chatter, the scent of burnt coffee and microwaved leftovers hanging in the air. David stood by the machine, pouring himself a cup he didn't really want, just to fill the silence of his own thoughts. His eyes were tired, his shirt slightly wrinkled, the weight of foreclosure notices and unpaid bills pressing on his chest like a hidden stone. David, a booming voice cut through the noise. It was Anthony, a colleague from accounting, always a little too loud, always a little too eager to be admired. He clapped David on the back, nearly spilling the coffee. Man, you should have seen my numbers last quarter. Passive income is the way. My friend, I don't even worry about overtime anymore. David forced a smile. Numbers? Anthony grinned, pulling out his phone with a flourish. Crypto, my man. Ethereum, Bitcoin, a little Solana. Bought low, cashed some out high, but that's just the start. I set up a YouTube channel, simple investing strategies. Quick videos, already monetized. Ads, affiliates, sponsorships. Dude, I'm making money while I sleep. The words stung like salt in an open wound. Making money while I sleep. For David, sleep was a battlefield, filled with numbers chasing him down dark corridors. Debt letters unfolding like nightmares. Anthony scrolled through his phone, showing graphs climbing upward, thumbnails of smiling faces with dollar signs in the background. Look at this, 10,000 subscribers already. People are starving for money stories. They want to know how to get out of the rat race. And me, I'm just giving him the playbook. David chuckled, but it came out hollow. Inside, he felt a surge of envy sharp enough to choke him. Anthony wasn't smarter, he wasn't more disciplined at work. He just knew something David hadn't. He'd seen an opportunity, grabbed it, and turned it into freedom. You ever thought about diversifying? Anthony continued, sipping his coffee like a man untouchable. Man, you can't just grind at the office forever. You gotta let your money work for you. Otherwise, you'll wake up one day and realize you've been running in circles. Passive income is the only ticket out. David's throat tightened. He wanted to scream. I already woke up that day. It's today. It's every day. But he stayed quiet, nodding like he was interested, pretending not to feel like a fraud in front of someone younger. Someone who had cracked the code. Anthony leaned in. Listen, I'm hosting a little workshop on investing strategies this weekend. Casual, just a few guys. We'll talk crypto, real estate crowdfunding, side hustles. You should come. It's never too late to start. Never too late. The words echoed in David's mind, but they felt like a cruel joke. He was drowning in mortgage arrears, credit card balances, bills that grew fatter by the week. What good was passive income when he couldn't even pay for his daughter's art class? Still, a flicker of something burned in his chest. Envy, yes, but also a strange kind of hunger. He imagined himself sitting at that workshop, hearing the rules laid out like a map. He imagined what it would feel like to say, even once in his life, I'm making money while I sleep. But the thought twisted bitter again. Crypto, YouTube, investing strategies, it all sounded like a world for people who weren't already trapped. People who had cash to risk, time to explore, a foundation to stand on. He had none of those things. He had bills, fear, and the sound of Rachel's voice breaking in the kitchen. You lied to me. Anthony patted his shoulder, oblivious to the storm beneath his colleague's calm smile. Think about it, David. You don't want to be working 9 to 5 until you're 70. Nobody does. Money doesn't wait, man. It compounds. David nodded, but the words felt like knives. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and stared at his computer screen. The spreadsheet of overdue accounts blurring into nothing. Outside, the SUV gleamed in the sun like a badge of false pride. For the first time, he realized something cruel. It wasn't just the bank or the bills that made him feel like a failure. It was the gap between him and men like Anthony, the ones who had found a way to make money while he was still chained to the grind. That gap was growing, and he had no idea if he could ever close it. And as he sat there, silent in the hum of the office, David understood the most painful truth of all. Envy wasn't just about wanting what others had. It was about seeing the mirror of what you could have been. If only you had acted sooner. The dining room smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken, the kind of comforting aroma that had once made David feel safe. Even as a grown man, his mother had cooked all afternoon, humming old Sinatra tunes under her breath, the clatter of pots and pans punctuating her fragile but determined rhythm. Now she sat across from him at the small oak table, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her posture dignified despite the years. Rachel had stayed home with the kids, so it was just the two of them, David and his mother. In the quiet of the house where he had grown up, the same house that had seen him graduate, marry, and swear he'd build a better future. But tonight, the silence between them felt heavier than the meal on their plates. She reached for the serving spoon, her hand trembling slightly with age, and placed a generous portion of potatoes on his plate. You're too thin, she said softly, her voice laced with concern rather than critique. Are you eating well? David forced a smile, stabbing at his chicken with a fork. Of course, Mom. Rachel keeps us fed. You don't need to worry. But she did, she always did, and as much as he tried to sound casual, he knew she could hear the hollowness behind his words. Mothers had a way of detecting cracks their children didn't want to show. For a while they ate in near silence, the only sounds the scraping of silverware and the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, gently, she asked, David, are you all right? His fork froze midair. He kept his eyes on his plate, as if the food could shield him from the weight of her gaze. I'm fine, he said quickly, maybe too quickly. Work is, you know, busy as always. She didn't argue, she simply looked at him, her faded blue eyes calm but piercing, as if she could see right through the armor he was desperately trying to hold in place. She had seen those eyes of his before, back when he was a boy trying to hide a failed test. Or a young man covering up a broken heart. But this time, what she saw was heavier, darker. You don't look fine, she said finally, her tone even, almost kind. You look tired, worn down. She hesitated, then added, worried. David let out a long breath through his nose, his hands tightening around the fork until his knuckles whitened. Mom, please, I don't want you worrying. I can handle it. Her lips pressed into a thin line, sadness etching deeper into her wrinkles. You've always tried to carry everything alone, even as a child, but some burdens aren't meant to be carried that way. The words sank into him like stones. He wanted to confess, to spill everything, the foreclosure notice, the debt piling up, The fights with Rachel, the disappointment in Noah and Lily's eyes when they couldn't afford their dreams. He wanted to tell her that the man she had raised, the man she had once called her rock, was crumbling piece by piece. But he couldn't bear to see disappointment in her face. Not from her, so he shoved another bite of chicken into his mouth, chewing like the act itself might silence the truth. His mother's gaze softened. She reached across the table, her hand weathered and warm, and placed it over his. He didn't pull away. "You don't have to tell me," she whispered. "I already know." The words shattered him in a way no bank letter ever had. Tears threatened at the edges of his eyes, but he blinked them back, forcing a weak smile. "It's just a rough patch," he lied. "We'll get through it." She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. "I hope so, David, because I don't want to see you lose yourself to all this. A house is just walls. Money comes and goes, but you're what matters." Her eyes lingered on him, heavy with love and unspoken fear. And in that moment, David felt the crushing weight of his choices, not just the missed payments or reckless spending, but the shame of failing not only his wife and children, but also the woman who had believed in him since the beginning. Dinner stretched on, but the food had no taste. When he left later that night, hugging her goodbye at the door, she held him longer than usual, her thin frame trembling slightly in his arms. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. David nodded, but as he walked to the shiny SUV waiting in the driveway, he felt her eyes on his back. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't accused, hadn't demanded, yet her quiet knowing, her quiet disappointment, cut deeper than any argument could. And as he drove away, he realized the most painful truth of all: he could hide the foreclosure notice from Rachel for weeks, from his kids for months, but he could never hide failure from his mother's eyes. The morning began with an email that felt like a death sentence. David opened his inbox at work, expecting routine memos and scheduling updates, only to see the subject line in bold red: "Department restructure, immediate effect." His heart sank before he even clicked it. The message was short, corporate, and cold. The company was cutting costs. Overtime, the one thing he had relied on for years to patch the gaps, was gone. No extra shifts, no holiday pay, no late nights to squeeze a little more into the paycheck. His lifeline had been severed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the fluorescent ceiling lights above, numbness spreading through his body. For 30 years, he had believed that working harder was always the answer. Work longer, push harder, show up earlier. But now, there was no harder to give. And with the overtime gone, the hole in his budget became a canyon. As if fate wanted to drive the knife deeper. His phone buzzed minutes later. It was another email, from the bank. The subject line read simply: "Foreclosure warning, second notice." He couldn't bring himself to open it. The words alone told him everything. The clock was ticking louder now, each passing day pulling the house further out of reach. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel was sitting in the school's parent lounge, waiting for Lily's art class to end. Her phone rang, unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, and the voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, and merciless. "Mrs. Carter, this is a courtesy call regarding your delinquent mortgage. Payment is now 90 days overdue. Failure to remit immediately will result in escalation." Rachel froze, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. I told you. We're working on it, my husband." "Mom," the caller interrupted, tone flat as stone, "unless a lump sum payment is made by the end of the week, foreclosure proceedings will continue. This is your second and final notice." Something inside her cracked, right there, in the middle of the school hallway with children's laughter echoing down the corridors. Rachel began to cry, the kind of cry that couldn't be stifled or hidden. Parents turned their heads, a teacher paused mid-step, concerned, but Rachel couldn't stop the sobs. Her chest heaved, and her free hand pressed against her forehead as if she could physically hold the world together before it split apart. When Lily came out, sketchbook in hand, she saw her mother in tears. Phone pressed to her ear. "Mom," she whispered, wide-eyed. Rachel quickly wiped her face, forced a trembling smile, and said, "It's okay, sweetheart, just grown-up stuff." But Lily wasn't fooled. Children never were. Back at the office, David stared blankly at his screen, the noise of keyboards and phones around him fading into static. He pictured Rachel crying, He didn't know why or where, but he knew it was happening. Because that's what debt did. It didn't just break wallets. It broke moments. It broke trust. It broke families piece by fragile piece. That evening, when Rachel walked through the door, her eyes red and swollen, she didn't need to say anything. David already knew. She dropped her purse on the counter, her voice hoarse. They called me, David, at the school, in front of everyone. Do you understand what that felt like? He reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. I can't do this anymore, living in fear, lying to the kids, pretending we're fine while strangers call to tell me we're about to lose everything. The house was silent except for the muffled sound of Noah bouncing a basketball upstairs and Lily quietly sketching in her room. The normalcy of their children's lives made the chaos between them feel even sharper. David finally whispered, I lost the overtime today. It's gone. Rachel's breath hitched, a fresh wave of tears forming. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to keep from screaming. For a long moment, they just stood there, two people at the center of a storm they had both helped create, watching as everything they thought was secure crumbled beneath their feet. The second foreclosure notice sat on the counter between them, unopened but heavy as a stone. It was no longer just a letter. It was a countdown, and for the first time, David understood. This wasn't about bad luck or a rough patch anymore. This was collapse. And unless something changed, it would take their house, their marriage, and every shred of dignity they had left. The walls of the house had never felt thinner. Upstairs, Noah dribbled his basketball in lazy thumps against the carpet, trying to drown out the heavy silence that lingered after dinner. Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, sketching half-formed shapes she couldn't finish. Both children felt the weight of something unspoken, something adults thought they could hide behind closed doors. Downstairs, David and Rachel stood in the kitchen, voices low at first, then sharper, breaking like glass. You promised me, David, Rachel hissed, her voice trembling. You swore you would make money, enough to cover the bills. That overtime would fix it. That we'd be fine. David slammed his hand against the counter, frustration spilling out. I thought it would. I thought if I just kept working, pushing harder, it would all fall into place. But it never did. Rachel's eyes burned. No, it didn't. Because you were too proud to admit the truth. Too afraid to say out loud that we were sinking. The words cut deeper than either expected. Their voices rose, echoing off the kitchen tiles. And that was when Noah froze at the top of the stairs, ball rolling quietly down behind him. Lily followed, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. They stood there in silence, listening, until Noah couldn't hold it anymore. Why didn't you just tell us? His voice cracked, sharp and wounded. Both parents turned, startled, seeing their son's face flushed with anger and pain. Lily peeked from behind him, her wide eyes brimming with fear. Noah, David started, but the boy cut him off. His fists clenched. Why didn't you just say we're broke? Why lie? Why let us think everything's fine while you yell and cry when you think we can't hear? The words hit like a punch. Rachel covered her mouth, tears spilling instantly. David's chest tightened, breath shallow, as the truth he had buried finally clawed its way into the open. Lily's voice was smaller, trembling. Are we gonna lose our house? Silence followed, the kind that suffocates. David opened his mouth, but nothing came. His son's eyes demanded answers. His daughter's eyes begged for comfort. He had neither to give. Rachel whispered, broken, we don't know, sweetheart. The air shattered then. Noah stormed down the stairs, shoving past his father. You're supposed to protect us, Dad, not lie to us. His words were a blade, leaving David hollow. Lily clung to her mother, sobbing quietly, her sketchbook slipping to the floor. For the first time, the house didn't feel like home. It felt like a stage where every hidden truth had finally been dragged into the light. The dream of family unity, of safety behind four walls, had cracked wide open. David sank into a chair, head in his hands, while Rachel pulled Lily close. Upstairs, Noah's door slammed so hard the frame rattled. And in that echo, the audience could feel it. The unraveling had begun. The lie of silence was gone. The truth, raw, brutal, undeniable, was out, and it left scars on everyone in that house. The rift wasn't just between husband and wife anymore. It had spread to their children. The family was no longer only fighting debt. They were fighting for each other's trust. For the very idea of being a family at all. Rachel had reached her breaking point. The arguments, the late bills, the foreclosure letters, she refused to let her family drift further into chaos without a fight. One Tuesday morning, while David sat in silence at the kitchen table staring at an unopened envelope, she slammed her purse down and said firmly, "Get up, we're going to see someone today." David blinked. "Who?" "A financial advisor," Rachel shot back. "Not another friend, not a coworker with crypto stories, not some YouTube guru promising passive income in 3 clicks. A real advisor, someone who will tell us the truth, even if it hurts." David wanted to argue, to say they couldn't afford it, but the weariness in her eyes silenced him. He followed, shoulders slumped, like a man walking into his own trial. The office they entered was nothing fancy, no mahogany desk, no soothing fountain in the corner, just a plain conference room with beige walls and a whiteboard, lit by the unforgiving hum of fluorescent lights. Behind the table sat a middle-aged man in a crisp gray suit. His glasses gleamed as he studied the folder Rachel had already emailed over: mortgage balance, credit card debt, car loan, income, expenses. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He tapped the papers once, looked at David, then Rachel, and said flatly, "This is not a budget. This is financial suicide." The words landed like a gavel strike. Rachel flinched. David felt heat crawl up his neck, shame wrapping around him tighter than any debt notice. The advisor pushed the folder forward. "Your monthly income, $6.200. Your monthly outflow, $9.400. Every month you are bleeding over $3. And yet you've convinced yourselves this is survivable." David opened his mouth, but the advisor raised a hand. "Don't explain, don't defend, numbers don't lie. You are borrowing to breathe. Payday loans, credit cards, a second mortgage. This is not strategy. This is denial with interest." Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint buzz of the ceiling light. Rachel's fingers dug into the edge of her chair. "Then what do we do?" she asked quietly. The advisor stood and walked to the whiteboard. He uncapped a marker and wrote 3 numbers: 503020. 50% essentials, mortgage, utilities, food, insurance. 30%, retirement contributions, investing strategies. Catch up if you're over 50. 20%, debt repayment and emergency fund. That's the formula. Cold, simple, brutal. David stared, shaking his head. "We can't live like that. Not with the kids. Not with." "You already aren't living," the advisor interrupted sharply. "You're surviving on borrowed time. If you don't restructure now, the bank will restructure for you. And that means foreclosure." His voice carried no sympathy, only certainty, each word cut deeper than the last. Rachel whispered, "So it's possible, we can still fix this." The advisor capped the marker. "Possible, yes. Easy, no. You will sell assets. You will cut expenses until it hurts. You will explain to your children why there is no vacation, no SUV, no new gadgets. You will learn to make money the slow way, through discipline. Not illusions. If you follow this formula for 5 years, you'll buy yourselves 25 years of freedom. If you don't, you'll be telling your children why you lost everything." David's jaw tightened. It wasn't advice. It was a verdict. Rachel reached for his hand under the table, but his palm was cold and stiff. The advisor's words echoed in his head: financial suicide. For the first time, David realized this wasn't just a family drama, not just overdue bills. This was life or death for their future. And the formula on that whiteboard, the cold math, was the only lifeline left. And as the couple left the office, silence hanging heavy between them, the audience could feel it. The fight was no longer against the bank alone. It was against themselves, against the illusions that had brought them here. And the war had only just begun. He didn't soften the lights, didn't lower his voice, didn't reach for metaphors that might make it all feel kinder. The advisor stood at the whiteboard with the marker poised like a scalpel and wrote 3 hard numbers again: 50, 30, 20, then drew a rectangle around him as if sealing the room inside a box that allowed no excuses to leak out. David and Rachel sat shoulder to shoulder, their fingers barely touching on the table, watching a stranger redraw the borders of their life. 50% is oxygen, he said, not lifestyle, not what we've always done. oxygen, mortgage or rent, utilities, basic insurance, phones on the cheapest plan that still work, groceries without entertainment baked in, transportation that gets you to work and back. Not the shiny version, the functional version. His pen scratched the math that had already humiliated them once. Your take-home is around $6,200 a month. Half of that is $3,100. That's your entire essentials envelope. Your current essentials are nearly $5,000. That means you have to cut $1,900 of what you think is necessary or your numbers never balance. It's not personal, it's arithmetic. He turned, eyes flat and professional. This is where the SUV goes away. You can keep calling it dignity, but in the math it's a payment you cannot afford. Replace it with the sedan, or a bus pass, or a bicycle if you live close enough. Keep the car that runs and sell the car that performs. Rachel swallowed, quiet tears threatening again. David stared at the board as if willpower alone could slide the numbers into a friendlier shape. The advisor continued, home, you either negotiate a modification or you list it. If the bank will not restructure, and given your arrears, they probably won't, you set a price and sell before they foreclose. A smaller rental you can pay beats a house you cannot. Pride is the most expensive line item on most budgets. He wiped his hands, drew the next box. 30% is future, retirement and investing strategies. This is where your 401k lives. Your IRA, your HSA if you have one. If you're 50 or older, you use catch-up contributions. That is not a suggestion. That is federal permission to fix your past. If you're under 50, you still fund aggressively, just without the catch-up top-off. He wrote figures beneath the heading, a monthly target of $1,860. You will say you can't afford this because you are behind. I will tell you that's exactly why you must afford this. Money grows when time and discipline meet, not when you promise it will later. David shook his head. How are we supposed to put almost $2,000 into retirement when we're drowning? That sounds impossible. It sounds impossible because you're living $9,000 on $6,200. The advisor replied, unblinking, bring expenses into the box. The math frees the cash. And no, you will not pause retirement for a year to catch up on debt. That's how people wake up at 60 with a tidy record of minimum payments and an empty nest egg. You want a different money story? Fund it. He moved to the final box. 20%, debt and emergency. This is where your minimums live plus the snowball or avalanche, your choice. But choose and stay ruthless. Build a starter emergency fund of $1,000 as soon as humanly possible so you stop swiping for emergencies that aren't emergencies. After that, every extra dollar goes to your highest cost debt until it dies. Then the next, when the debts are gone, this slot becomes your 3 to 6 month buffer. But not before. Rachel found her voice, thin but steady. What about the kids? Camps? Classes? We told them no this year. I don't want to keep saying no forever. You won't, he said, but right now, you're displacing their future to protect their present from discomfort. Teach them the plan. Let them see the staircase. When the SUV payment vanishes and the grocery line drops and the utility bills are renegotiated, you'll buy back choices, not with credit, by killing cost. He faced the board again, drew 3 columns beneath the boxes. This month, 90 days, 1 year, the timeline was a highway with no scenic routes. This month, you sell the SUV, call the lender, ask, once more, about a modification, and if they won't, you photograph every room and request a quick CMA so you know the list price before the bank takes that decision from you. You cancel non-essentials, subscriptions, auto deliveries, just because, line items that attach themselves to your identity. You set your phones to prepaid if you have to. You switch to cash envelopes for groceries. You cook. You batch. You stop buying convenience as a coping mechanism. He tapped the 90-day column. 90 days. The first debt dies. I do not care if it's the smallest payday loan or the store card with a 3-digit limit. Something dies so momentum lives. You track every payment on a wall calendar where your kids can see progress. Shame hates sunlight. Debt hates discipline. He tapped 1 year, 12 months. You have $1,000 in cash. 2 dead debts. A cheaper roof. A phone bill that doesn't eat dinner. And, if your age allows, 12 months of 401k contributions that include catch-up. If not, you still have 12 months of contributions because retirement funding is not a luxury. It is rent you pay your future self. David made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. And investing, beyond the 401k, we're supposed to, what? Pick stocks, start a YouTube channel and teach people how to make money like Anthony. Stop trying to be interesting. The advisor said, almost bored. Be consistent. Use broad, low-cost index funds in the accounts designed for them. Automate. Ignore noise. If you want passive income, earn it the old way. Own productive assets for a very long time. Then let distributions arrive on their schedule, not yours. You are not day traders. You are parents who need a plan that works while you sleep without asking you to perform on the internet. He didn't sneer at YouTube, he deflated it to its proper size. If content becomes a revenue stream later, great, but it's a job, not a lottery. Right now, your job is to stop the hemorrhage and feed the compounding machine. That's how people make money without ruining their lives to chase it. He capped the marker and finally sat. The room felt colder, cleaner, as if a storm had passed and left only the map. I am not promising you comfort. I am promising you math. Follow this for 5 years and you will not be at the mercy of lenders. You will be at the mercy of your discipline. Which is a better master? Ignore it, and the bank writes your ending. Rachel leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. What if we fail? Then you fail forward, he said, but you won't if you remove willpower from the daily menu. Automate transfers on payday. Freeze the cards in a literal block of ice if you have to. Put the 503020 on the fridge where your children can see it and learn. You want to give them a gift? Give them a blueprint, not a bailout. Something shifted in David's chest, not relief exactly, not hope yet, but an end to the fog. The advisor had not inspired them, he had indicted them and then handed them a sentence they could serve in daylight. The words passive income no longer sounded like a fantasy whispered by men with thumbnails and cryptographs. Investing strategies no longer felt like a maze, they felt like rails. Money stopped being a mood, it became a system. He pictured the SUV leaving the driveway, the for sale sign staked in the lawn if the bank said no again. The grocery envelopes clipped with binder clips. The auto contribution hitting on the 15th like a metronome. He pictured Noah tracing the red X's on a kitchen calendar as one debt after another went quiet. He pictured Lily taping a drawing above the formula on the fridge. Coloring the boxes in with greens and blues like the plan itself was becoming art. The advisor slid a printout across the table, 3 pages. Dense with their numbers rearranged into obedience. At the bottom, a single line, 5 years of discipline equals 25 years of freedom. It wasn't motivational, it read like a clause in a contract. Rachel took David's hand, and this time he gripped back. The shame didn't disappear, it repositioned itself. No longer a fog but a spur. Their money story had been written in purchases and pretending. Now the next chapter would be written in cancellations, transfers, and quiet, relentless choices that nobody on the block would applaud. Outside, the afternoon sun flared off the SUV's windshield like a last flash of costume jewelry. Inside, the plan sat between them, severe and unglamorous and alive. They didn't smile, they signed, and the first true payment they made was not to a bank or a broker. It was to the future that had finally, mercifully, acquired rules. The paperwork sat on the table like a sentence waiting to be spoken. A stack of forms, thick, gray, stamped with the words bankruptcy petition. David hovered over it, pen in hand, sweat dampening his temples though the air in the room was cool. His chest ached with a mixture of dread and shame, the kind that swelled louder with every tick of the kitchen clock. He had signed hundreds of documents in his life, mortgage agreements, loan applications, overtime slips, but this one carried the weight of public failure. His hand trembled as he whispered, almost to himself, if I sign this, it's admitting I lost, that I couldn't handle it, that I'm not the man I thought I was. Rachel stood across the table, arms folded tight as if holding herself together. Her voice cracked, raw but steady. You're not afraid of the paperwork, David. You're afraid of losing face. You're terrified of what the neighbors will think, what your co-workers will whisper. You're clinging to pride while this house, this family, is slipping through your fingers. David lifted his eyes, defensive fire sparking. You don't understand what it means to a man. To admit bankruptcy is to admit I failed my role as provider. It's humiliation. It's losing honor. Rachel slammed her palm against the table, startling him. Honor, you think this is about honor? I'm not scared of losing honor. I'm scared of losing our home. I'm scared of Noah and Lily coming home to find our furniture on the lawn because foreclosure finally hit. I'm scared of waking up in some cheap apartment, listening to them cry because they don't have their rooms anymore. That's what I'm scared of. So tell me, David, what's worse, losing your pride or losing everything we built for them? Silence pressed into the room like a heavy fog. David's throat tightened, his eyes stinging. He wanted to argue, to defend the part of him that still clung to dignity. But the words curdled before they reached his lips. He thought of the SUV gleaming in the driveway like a cruel reminder, of the foreclosure letters, of the advisor's cold verdict, financial suicide. He thought of his children's eyes when they asked if they still had money for school. And the way his mother's gaze had pierced him at dinner, as if she already knew. Rachel softened, her voice breaking into tears. Do you know what real humiliation is? It's telling your kids there's no money for basketball camp, no money for art class, no money for the future they dream about. It's watching them shrink because we can't give them stability. That's humiliation, David. Signing this paper, that's survival. Her words hit harder than any banker's threats, harder than any collector's call. They were not numbers on a ledger, they were the weight of love. Breaking under his refusal to act, David's hand shook as he gripped the pen again. He felt his pride buckling, like a bridge collapsing under too much weight. Tears blurred his vision. For a moment, he couldn't see the form, couldn't see the numbers. He only saw Rachel, her face lined with exhaustion, her eyes swollen from crying, her voice trembling between rage and despair. And in that moment, he realized what had been clear to her all along. Bankruptcy wasn't the loss of honor. It was the price of keeping their family together. He lowered the pen to the page, hesitating, fighting every instinct to resist. His hand hovered, then pressed down, tracing the first letter of his name. A man breaking, a man surrendering, not to defeat, but to reality. Rachel exhaled, a sob slipping through her chest as she whispered, "That's the first step, David, not the end, the beginning." The kitchen filled with silence, heavy and fragile, broken only by the scratching of his signature. A chapter of their money story had closed with shame, but another, one of brutal honesty and a chance at rebirth, had just begun. The SUV gleamed in the driveway, its polished chrome catching the early morning sun like a cruel joke. To the neighbors, it was still a symbol of success, the kind of car that said middle class made it. To David, it was an anchor, a monthly payment that threatened to drag his family under. He stood beside it, key in hand, while Rachel waited on the porch with crossed arms and tear-swollen eyes. The children peeked through the blinds, their faces pale with unspoken questions. The dealership's tow truck arrived with a low growl. The driver, indifferent, clipped the chains around the tires as if he were fastening cuffs. David felt his throat tighten, his chest constrict. He had driven that car to every soccer practice, every weekend trip, every family dinner. It wasn't just metal and leather, it was memory. But now, as the truck pulled it away, it became something else entirely, proof of the lies they had told themselves about what they could afford. Rachel whispered, her voice both relieved and broken. One less bill. She wanted to believe it was a victory. But watching the car disappear down the street felt like watching a piece of their pride hauled off in broad daylight. Inside, the kitchen table was littered with credit cards, sleek plastic rectangles that once felt like keys to opportunity. David picked up the scissors, his hand trembling. Each snip was sharp, final, echoing like a gavel in a silent courtroom. Visa, MasterCard, American Express. With every cut, he heard the weight of years of reckless swipes, dinners they couldn't afford, gadgets they didn't need, vacations they pretended were deserved. The pile of broken cards grew, and with it came a strange mix of grief and liberation. Then came the hardest conversation. Noah sat at the table, basketball jersey half-zipped, excitement still in his eyes. Lily clutched her sketchbook, pencil smudges on her fingers. They were waiting for answers. David's voice cracked as he forced the words out. "We're transferring you both to public school next semester." Silence. Then Noah's brows furrowed. "But Dad, my coach, my friends." Lily's lip trembled. "But the art program." Rachel tried to steady them, her voice soft but pained. "We can't afford private tuition anymore. It doesn't mean you'll lose your dreams. It just means we have to do things differently now." Noah slammed his chair back, his young pride wounded. "So we just give up? You promised." His voice broke before he could finish. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her sketchbook tight, retreating into silence. David reached across the table, desperate, but his children pulled away. He wanted to tell them that dreams weren't cancelled, only deferred, that survival was the first step toward rebuilding. But in that moment, all they could see was loss. The house seemed to echo with their disappointment. Each decision, selling the SUV, cutting the cards, pulling the kids from their schools, felt like a knife carving away the life they had once flaunted. Yet beneath the bleeding pride, there was a fragile truth: these sacrifices were not the end. They were the beginning of something leaner, harsher, but more honest. David sat back, staring at the pile of broken cards, the empty driveway, the children's quiet sobs drifting down the hall. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a verdict: we're losing everything, so we can finally save what matters. The first 90 days felt like a military boot camp for the soul. David sat at the kitchen table every night with a battered notebook, a cheap calculator, and a stack of receipts, writing down every cent that moved in or out of their household. Gasoline, $42.37. Groceries, $118.54. Coffee, $0. Because he had finally broken the ritual of morning lattes. The pages became a confession booth in ink, each line a reminder of how careless they had been, and how brutally honest they needed to be now. Rachel turned into the gatekeeper of survival. She clipped coupons, scoured discount aisles, and planned every meal down to the last potato. Gone were the restaurant dinners, the takeout containers, the convenience of swiping plastic when the fridge felt empty. Instead, the family sat down to home-cooked meals, often repetitive, sometimes bland, but seasoned with the bitter knowledge that they were clawing back control. Tensions were raw. Arguments broke out over small things: a $15 birthday gift, a forgotten bill, a gallon of milk purchased at the wrong store. But beneath the fights was something new: accountability. David, for the first time, wasn't hiding receipts or hoping bonuses would cover his mess. Rachel, though exhausted, wasn't begging for clarity. Everything was written down, measured, exposed. At Rachel's insistence, David joined a local Gamblers Anonymous group after admitting that some of their missing savings had slipped away on small bets at the racetrack, which he had always dismissed as harmless. The fluorescent-lit church basement smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. Men and women sat in a circle, their voices heavy with regret. When it was his turn, David cleared his throat, the shame raw in his chest. "My name is David," he said quietly, "and I thought I was smarter than the odds. I wasn't." The room nodded. No judgment, just recognition. That silent solidarity struck him harder than any collector's call. Rachel, meanwhile, became almost ruthless with their finances. She introduced what she called zero-based budgeting. Every dollar had a job: pay this bill, reduce that debt, feed the emergency fund. There was no room for mystery, no space for luxury. She taped envelopes to the fridge marked utilities, groceries, gas, each one containing cash ration for the week. When it was gone, it was gone. Noah and Lily groaned about living like monks. But Rachel snapped back: better monks than beggars. Slowly, painfully, something shifted. By the second month, the mountain of dread began to shrink, if only by inches. One credit card was fully closed. Balance zero. The checking account, once drained by overdrafts, now held a tiny cushion, just $500. But it was a victory. The emergency jar on the kitchen counter clinked with coins and crumpled bills, an unlikely symbol of hope. On day 90, David flipped through the notebook. The numbers were still terrifying, but they were finally moving in the right direction. He looked at Rachel, worn thin but standing tall, and managed a tired smile. "We survived 3 months." Rachel didn't smile back, but her eyes softened. "No," she corrected, "we fought for 3 months. And we're not done." In that dim kitchen, surrounded by envelopes, notebooks, and sacrifice, the faintest light of redemption began to pierce through the cracks of despair. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but for the first time, it wasn't only survival, it was the fragile beginning of discipline, of building, instead of breaking. The day the first credit card balance hit zero, David almost didn't believe it. He logged into the account twice, then 3 times, staring at the bold numbers that had haunted him for years. Finally gone. No minimum payment waiting like a wolf at the door. No interest piling on like a slow-burning fire. Just a clean slate. The amount wasn't huge by Wall Street standards. But for them, it was a mountain conquered. That night, Rachel decided they needed to mark the moment, even if only in the smallest way. She brought home a single large pizza from a hole-in-the-wall shop down the block, no toppings beyond cheese. The cheapest on the menu. She set it on the table with paper plates. No fancy drinks, just a bottle of store-brand soda. But the smell filled the house like a celebration, warm and intoxicating. The kids' faces lit up as if it were a holiday. Noah grabbed a slice so fast the cheese nearly slid off, while Lily clapped her hands and said, "It's like old times." The word struck David in the chest, because he remembered those old times. When pizza nights were casual, thoughtless, a weekly ritual funded by swipes of plastic. Back then, it never felt special. Now, with every bite, it tasted like triumph. For a moment, the house was alive with laughter. Rachel teased Noah for wolfing down his slice. Lily spilled soda on the table and they all scrambled with napkins. And David leaned back, letting the rare sound of his family's joy wash over him. He hadn't heard it in months. But the warmth of that moment carried shadows too. Between slices, David's mind drifted to flashbacks, the nights Rachel had cried silently over unpaid bills. The morning when he'd snapped at Noah for asking about basketball camp. The sickening silence when collectors left voicemails that the kids overheard. The weight of those memories pressed on him. But instead of drowning in them, he felt something shift. Those flashbacks weren't just reminders of pain, they were proof of how far they had already come. Rachel raised her soda cup and tapped it against his. "One card down," she said softly, 100 battles to go. "But tonight, we celebrate." David nodded, his throat tight. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that victories, however small, mattered. Because in the middle of crushing debt and relentless sacrifice, joy wasn't just possible, it was necessary. As the night drew on, the empty pizza box sat in the trash like a trophy. The house grew quiet, but the feeling lingered. They weren't just sinking anymore. They were climbing, step by step, bite by bite, and for once, even if just for a few hours, hope tasted like melted cheese and laughter shared around a battered kitchen table. 2 years had passed, and the Rossi family no longer lived in the big suburban house with the manicured lawn and the heavy mortgage that had once been their pride, and their prison. Instead, they had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town. The walls were thinner, the kitchen smaller, and the view outside the window was nothing more than a row of aging brick buildings. But there was a warmth in the air that the old house had never known. The shift wasn't just about square footage. It was about weight, or rather, the lack of it. No more constant letters from the bank. No collectors circling like vultures. No late-night fights about bills. Life was still tight. Every dollar still accounted for. But this time, the discipline carried a strange sweetness. On a rainy Saturday morning, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting light across the modest room. She pulled up the account summary and smiled quietly. 50,000, she said, almost whispering as if the number might vanish if spoken too loud. David leaned over her shoulder, blinking at the screen. They had been depositing consistently into a broad-based ETF for 2 years now, sticking to the plan their advisor had carved out with surgical precision. $50,000, not borrowed, not mortgaged, not a gift from anyone else. Money that was theirs, real money. Rachel closed the laptop gently, placed her hand over David's, and looked at him with a softness he hadn't seen in years. "This," she said, voice steady, "is real wealth. Not the Mercedes, not the granite countertops, not the vacations we charged to a card. That was illusion. This," she tapped his hand lightly, "this is freedom being built one brick at a time." David felt something stir deep in his chest. For decades, he had chased the wrong symbols, the shiny SUV, the expensive dinners, the house he couldn't truly afford. He had believed, like so many around him, that appearance was substance, that status meant security. But looking around their small apartment, with its second-hand furniture and walls lined with his kids' drawings, he realized Rachel was right. The illusion had finally shattered, and what replaced it, though modest, was solid. That night, as the family gathered for dinner around a small but sturdy table. David raised his glass of water in a quiet toast. 2 years, he said. 2 years of sacrifice, of hard choices. And look at us, we're not just surviving. We're growing. Noah grinned. Lily clapped her hands. Rachel smiled that steady smile again. And for the first time, David truly believed it. They weren't clawing against the tide anymore. They were moving with it, carried forward by discipline, patience, and the quiet truth of compounding growth. The apartment wasn't grand, the balance wasn't millions, but the feeling, it was wealth. And this time, it wasn't an illusion, it was real. The sun was dipping low over the neighborhood where their nightmare had once begun. David walked hand in hand with Noah and Lily. His steps slower, more thoughtful. They turned a corner, and there it was, the old house. The once proud dream, now stripped bare, its yard overgrown, paint peeling, and in front of it, a stark white sign with black letters, Foreclosure. The children grew quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. David stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the place where he had poured decades of sweat, overtime, and misplaced pride. Memories crashed back, Rachel crying over bills in the kitchen, the endless phone calls from the bank, his own shame like chains around his chest. For a long time, he had believed losing this house meant losing everything. But standing there now, with his kids' hands in his, he realized the opposite was true. Losing the illusion had given him the chance to build something real. He knelt down so Noah and Lily could see his eyes. We used to live there, he said softly, pointing at the empty house with the sign. And when it was taken from us, I thought we were finished. But that's not the truth. Because we didn't lose, we learned. We learned that discipline beats appearances. That money isn't about looking rich, it's about being free. The kids listened, their young faces reflecting a seriousness beyond their years. David's voice grew steadier, louder, almost as if he was speaking not just to them, but to anyone who would listen. We stood up again, we built back, step by step, and I want you to remember this, the last 5 years before retirement. Before any big chapter in your life can decide the next 25 years. 5 years of discipline can buy 25 years of freedom, but only if you start now. He looked back at the foreclosure sign one last time. For years it had been a symbol of failure. Today, it was a reminder of survival. Rachel, who had followed a few steps behind, slipped her arm through his. Together, they turned away from the house and walked down the street with their children. Not toward the past, but toward a future they were finally writing on their own terms. And with every step, David felt lighter, because this time, he wasn't carrying shame, he was carrying proof. Final viral line. 5 years of discipline can turn into 25 years of freedom, if you start today.